I'm delighted to be joined by Robert Rinder. Robert, tonight you're here representing Shelter, with whom you do a bit of work. Now, you, as I understand it, are very concerned about the impact on COVID on people's ability to pay their rents. You know, the government has announced that most people can't be evicted with less than 6-month notice. Right. But I think Shelter feels that these eviction notices are coming in now, and you're deeply concerned.
It's not just a question that Shelter feels, it's a fact, and thank you for highlighting it and having me on. You know, I'm not party political, and this is one of the issues that when you sit down and speak to people of every political complexion, they agree on. Every government has been guilty of removing legal aid, of limiting most people's access to justice, and our rule of law is meaningless unless everybody has access to justice. It's not just for the rich.
And can I just ask you what you mean by that? So what you're saying is that if you are facing an eviction notice, many people will want to, essentially challenge it, but they can't because they can't get legal aid.
They need help. They need legal advice, and that's what Shelter can do. But, of course, they're a tiny part of what used to be available to the poorest amongst us. And who are those poor? Those people going into COVID thought that they were basically safe. They were perhaps 1, 2, 3, 4 a month's worth of income away from rental crisis. Tonight, as we think about going home, there are 322,000 people in rental arrears. Tonight, Robert, in our communities, our neighbours, these are people that live amongst us. They are our communities. 136,000 children are homeless tonight. There are over 1 million people who are waiting for a home. And as we think about that, we ask ourselves, what society do we have? And this is something which can galvanise every single person, regardless of your, as I say, political complexion.
So restoring legal aid is one thing that you would like to see. What about those arrears? Should the government be doing more either to help those arrears, help people pay off their arrears, or should those debts just be written off? What do you think should happen?
That's completely critical. The government needs to address this as a matter of absolute urgency. There needs to be full consideration for cancelling rental debt that's resulted as a result of this crisis. And let's not forget, just to be clear, it's not just about people who are renting. It's not just about that. Millions of homeowners, people who were understandably enticed into buy-to-let mortgages, might have one property, and that will pay for their pension. It applies to landlords as well. It's absolutely essential, especially as we go into Christmas, to think about the thing that we perhaps look out to most, the thing that evaluates who we are as a society, the barometer of our communities. So we look out and we see homelessness, especially homeless children. What sort of community are we? And that's what Shelter can help with. But they're a small part of that answer. If people are in rental crisis, and that's why I'm so grateful you've had me on, please don't bury your head in the sand. The critical thing is to reach out. There is some legal help there. Sadly, it's not being provided by the government. Not just this government, it's been generations that's undermined that.
Robert, much more to pick up on all of this very important stuff. Don't go away. As I say, more from Robert Rinder after the break, and from Becky Long-Bailey and Kate Fall. Come back in a minute or two. Robert, you, since we're talking about the war, we made this very moving two-part series, My Family, the Holocaust and Me, which just aired on the other network. I was deeply moved by essentially the stories of children, grandchildren of survivors, or those who were brutally exterminated. What's the reaction been to you personally? When I was growing up, obviously from a Jewish family, lots of people just did not want to talk about the Holocaust.
And that's a central theme in this programme. But you asked a question about what the reaction has been. And, you know, it's been one of the really good news stories. There wasn't a peep of anti-Semitism on social media. There was a thirst across the political spectrum for people to listen, to hear, and to be willing to witness and to take on board those stories. And, you know, I can't tell you how optimistic and heartened I am by that, despite, as you described, the painful nature of the subject matter. You know, those that would have seen the first episode would have seen, not by happenstance, that all of the stories didn't take place in some Eastern European backwater, often the way in which the Holocaust is presented through the prism of black and white, as if it was an explosion of violence of one unassimilated community against another. This was, you see, Germany and Amsterdam, and those pictures, those photographs look and seem so relevant, so urgent. They feel current, as if they're today. And what I hope people heard, regardless of their point of view, wherever they come from, whatever tribal allegiance they may have, the thing that they heard is what the critical ingredients were that led into that inhumanity. What you needed was the right catastrophic economic events. That's resonant for today. You needed people to feel aggrieved by a treaty and the wrong person at the right place in the wrong time. And there you have your alchemy that led, as we saw, into that journey of depravity. And there can be nothing but zero tolerance for those that espouse that hate. And we need to stop, reflect, and think about what that hate consists of, and how it starts with perhaps a trope, how it starts with quiet racism, how it starts with people failing to remember to be courageous. You know, I've had so many tweets and responses, and, you know, I've been reflecting recently as I've been learning, as many people have, and thinking about what Maya Angelou said. And she said, you know, you can't practice any of the virtues consistently without courage. That means there needs to be zero tolerance for all forms of racism, anti-Jewish racism, Islamophobia. None of it can be tolerated.
And can I just ask you on this? I mean, the Holocaust for some of us defines, in a sense, who we are. But were you also surprised by how many people genuinely didn't really know about the magnitude of what happened?
That's a really thoughtful question. There was another complexion to the stories that we told, which was, and are, and remain, the culture of silence around that trauma and its impact in the threads that have woven themselves into the tapestry of who we are as a second and third generation. And that also has a broader resonance. You know, a few weeks ago, we would have seen the last of that greatest generation at the cenotaph. They never spoke about their war experiences. People who have survived other genocides, new citizens, perhaps people who have lived through trauma like Grenfell. What does it mean after that to go on to parent? And I think it invites the question for all of us to remember that our parents are human beings. They were the sum of all of the various experiences they had. And when we think about their humanity and we locate it in a more grown-up way, I hope that improves the emotional lives of everybody and gets everybody to think, to talk, to listen and to hear, but above all else, to witness and to take personal responsibility for remembering.
Robert, thanks so much for joining us today for that very powerful account of the disaster of the Holocaust. I'd like to thank Kate and I'd like to thank Becky. We may be locked down, but there's no locking down the news. Join us next week for more madness. Bye-bye.